Started on time, so if everybody's all right with that.
That's why we came early.
We don't want to start late, so I want to get us going on time. I don't think we have a flag here. I like to start this with a pledge. I know we got two veterans in the front, and so we got a picture maybe. But if I can ask our two veterans who are standing up here with our hats to lead us, that'd be terrific.
You have three.
Three, apologize.
Four.
A large number, so you want to lead us? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Veterans remain standing with show them a round of applause, please. Thank you for your service. I didn't want to take over your meeting, but we always...
No, that's exactly right. You look at, this room is almost about 40 to 50% veterans, so it's thank you guys for your service. You think about what makes our country strong. I think what's front of mind in my service in Washington, it's to defend our United States, and it's the men and women who put themselves on the line. And so appreciate all of your service for everybody who's not here. And Chuck Wickers, who is our state representative for this area, thank you for joining us, Chuck. Really appreciate you coming out. So as you may know, this is my first ever listening session, and that's because I've never been elected to office before. And so I'm less than a month in, and what I wanted to do right out of the gates here is I get to 1 month in, go to all 6 counties that make up the 1st Congressional District, starting in Waukesha County. And we're going to work our way through today and on Monday, just to have a conversation. I think it's great. I know a lot of people have reached out to our office through email, through mail, phone calls, visiting. I know the first week we had 1,500 people call and email and write us. We're working to get responses out as fast as we can. Admittedly, it's like building a new company. We're getting people on the team. I'm writing every letter. And so we're backed up a little bit, admittedly, but we're going to get through every single person that writes to us, we're going to get back to you. But I thought, let's just jump out and have a conversation. The thing that I like most about the state of Wisconsin, not like Washington, D.C., is that although we may disagree on some of the ideas and the best way to move our country forward, we can have that in a civil and thoughtful way. So that's my favorite part of Wisconsin. I think that's going to carry over today as we have our conversation. There's a lot of tough issues we're facing in Washington, but I think we can do it civilly and have a good discourse and an exchange of ideas. So I really appreciate you guys coming out to do that with me today. Before we jump into questions, I'm going to be short because I want to open it up to questions and really have a dialogue. I just want to cover a couple high-level items that are kind of front of mind for me as I got through my first 4 weeks in Washington being your voice. And so I think one of the real things that we need to do is make sure that we're addressing the skills gap. I come from a background working on the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents, so I spent a lot of time working on the education policy. What are we doing in our high schools to prepare workers for the jobs of the future? How do we bring technical training right into the high schools so you can maybe get your first year along the way? If you want to be a welder, you can get your first year done in high school, shorten up the time that you need to be in training after that, build in and work on that skills gap. Front of mind for me on the federal level is that we need to allow significantly more flexibility in the federal programs, to allow creativity at the local level, to allow apprenticeship programs to have that flexibility that they have, but also allow that into our 2-year schools and into our 4-year schools to be able to address the workforce needs that we have right here. I always say, who's best at preparing students to meet the workforce needs right here in Southeast Wisconsin? The people of Southeast Wisconsin, not a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. Also, front of mind, as I talk to people, we need to work to lower the cost of healthcare. And so, to me, that in large part is empowering patients and doctors to make decisions that are in their own best interests and to step away from federal government regulation and control in that structure. We can chat about that today as well. Front of mind and why I'm running in large part is protecting Social Security and Medicare. I have a grandma who's in Evanston, Illinois, just north of Chicago. She's 101. My grandpa grew up in the west side of the city of Chicago. She grew up in the city of Chicago as well. And he started working at Wrigley's, the chewing gum company, back in the day. So he went to Wrigley's in the late 30s, joined the United States Army 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. His father, who fought in World War I, my grandfather, said, there's going to be a world war and you're better off to join today than to get drafted when this war comes. And so he joined in 1939, Ultimately was called up in 41 and was activated, went to North Africa with Patton, was the first group to depart the United States. Wrigley's held his job open for those 5 years. He came back in 1945. They credited him for his time of service. He retired on his 65th birthday with a full pension. I know there's some people here with pension shirts on, so it comes front to mind. Okay, a lot of you guys are pension, that's good. No, but he retired in 1983 on his 65th birthday with his pension from Wrigley Chewing Gum. And they credited his time that he was serving in the United States military. My grandma, who's 101, is still living off the Wrigley, which is awesome that she's 101. She's, you can clap for Grandma Phelan anytime. She lives off of that pension and off of Social Security, which is her survivor benefits from the work that my grandfather did while he worked, and on Medicare. And so that's front of mind, that we need to protect Social Security, Medicare, and the importance of pensions, and we can chat about that as we go with question time. Good to hear. Is we need to protect that, because the people that put in their hard work and their time and their effort, that's a promise, particularly Medicare and Social Security. That's a promise that the federal government made to people as they worked. And to seniors that are in retirement and those approaching retirement age, we need to make sure that there's no changes and those individuals are protected. And so that's front of mind. Looks like we'll have a few questions probably on pensions, so I'll save pension chat until we get there.
We paid into that.
Yeah, well,
it's not an entitlement. We paid into that.
I think it's a promise we made to seniors. Social Security, Medicare, you're not going to get pushback from me. We have a lot of veterans, as we saw, standing up. We talked a little bit about the appreciation for what men and women do to put themselves on the front line. I'm a big believer that we need to stand behind the men and women who put on our uniform. One of the things that I think has been a tradition of the 1st Congressional District, and this goes from Les Aspin to Paul Ryan and men in between, that there's an ability to provide constituent services. So if you or you know someone who's having a problem obtaining the benefits that they earned while wearing our United States military uniform, problem getting GI benefits, a problem getting VA benefits, one of your first calls should be to our office. We have a great team. Megan in the back is one of our absolute best people that does constituent services work. She oversees, in particular, veteran services. So I want you to share that word of mouth with your fellows, men and women that have worn the uniform, that if you have a problem with the federal government obtaining the benefits you deserve, reach out to our office. Our contact information is in the back. Ask for Megan, and we'll do what we can to guide through the federal government bureaucracy, which no doubt can get in the way. One of the things that's front of mind for me on the veteran side is making sure that when individuals leave their time of service, that their transition into the workforce is a little more seamless than it is today. There was a guy during the campaign, I was out at a parade, and a guy came up and he was wearing a Marine's cap and said, "Can I walk with you in the parade?" I have no idea who this guy was. I said, "Sure, yeah, come on in the parade." And so we walked the parade, and he was all over talking to people, walking up and shaking every veteran's hand. And he came and said, I said, "Thanks for coming." He said, "Do you think I can come again?" I said, "Absolutely." He said, "Can my wife come?" I said, "Absolutely." So his wife was also a Marine veteran. He had just completed 20 years of service. He was shot by a sniper in Iraq, but ultimately recovered and continued his service. Then he was in the United States serving just outside of Washington, D.C., and he was hit by a drunk driver. And he was ultimately slightly brain damaged, very slightly, but enough that the Marines discharged him from service. And so after 20 years, he retired with full benefits, but had that slight brain damage, which forced him to exit. He's not from Wisconsin, but his wife is, so he married really well. At least that's what I'd say. So he's a smart guy. And so he moved to Wisconsin, never lived here before, and that's where she was originally from. And so they moved to Wisconsin and moved to LaGrange, which is not that far down from here, if you know where LaGrange is in Walworth County. But joined our team. And so he and I would drive around most of the fall together. Would talk a lot about his time of service, but also the challenges that he faced upon leaving the service. He was a master sergeant, an enlisted guy, E9 level. But then he was then discharged after this injury, and he didn't know, "Brian, how do I get back in?" And that's why actually he came and helped out on the campaign. He was functionally unemployed. And so now, after the end of the campaign, he's now working at a distribution company in Beloit. who we introduced him to. The guy is spectacular. You can't get a better worker than somebody that's been through any of our branches of the military. You cannot get a better worker. We have a skills gap, but what we don't do really well is transition individuals, men and women, after their time of service so they're ready to make that step back into the civilian world, to be able to leverage the leadership skills that they have, the hard work ethic that they have, to get that next high-paying job. And I think there's a real opportunity, in particular as we look at trained skills, so the skills that you learn in the military, to make sure that you get the certification that you need that translates directly back into the civilian world. And so that's an area that I'm going to be spending time at here in the future to make sure that we're able to take advantage of our veterans, the skill sets that they have, the leadership skills that they have, so they can transition in. So that's front of mind for me. Talk about trade, and hopefully maybe we have a little bit of a conversation on this. What's going on the trade side is the president came in and shook things up. And so he's brought people back to the table to negotiate trade. We've had tariffs come in place. I'm of the belief that what we need to ultimately do is lower the barriers to trade so we can take our goods that we manufacture here, that we farm here, and sell them freely, fairly, and reciprocally around the globe. I think that's where we need to get to. What the president's done is came in and shook things up, and now we're beginning negotiations kind of on a large scale as to how we bring these barriers back down. So first, out of the gates, we're having those conversations with our allies. And so we've seen some movement with the European Union, where those negotiations are ongoing. We're seeing a revision of what was NAFTA, so the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is now USMCA, United States, Mexico, and Canada. The ability to get a trade agreement in place that provides the protections that we need, in particular that allows the United States to take the goods that we manufacture here, the goods that we're growing here with our farmers, and to be able to trade them freely and fairly is where we need to get to. We need to lock up those agreements with our allies, the EU, Canada, Mexico, so we can collectively pivot and look at China, which is really where the real abuse is occurring, and our ability to take our goods that we're farming here or that we're manufacturing here and our ability to sell them into China. They also have a lot of intellectual property abuse where they're stealing intellectual property or misappropriating it and not allowing the United States to get the benefit of the hard work that we're doing. So I think where we're on the path is focus on the trade agreements with our allies, then collectively as a group pivot and focus on China and bring China to the table. We can talk about that. There's questions on that as well. I mentioned to you, my promise is to get out and to be as accessible and visible and to have the dialogue that we can have. In the first week, we had over 1,000 people call, write, and email. As you might have noticed, there was a government shutdown, so lots of people are talking about it. We'll talk about that as well. And so rightfully so, people are reaching out. I'm also less than 1 month into office, and so I have a spectacular team of people that are helping me out, be your voice in Washington. But I'm working as hard as I can to make sure that we're responding to every phone call, every letter, every email. And so I'm proud of the fact that we've already gotten 3,000 responses sent out over the last month, but we don't have every single person a response yet. And so my team knows that's our commitment, is that everybody who writes is going to get a response. But then in addition, I want to be available in the flesh, which is why we're here today, so we can have a conversation directly and have a little bit more of a listening back and forth, and I can learn a little bit of what's on your mind, and maybe you can hear a little bit about what's on my mind. We've also do a lot of casework. I talked about that in the context of veterans, that if you have an issue with the federal government, but that also carries over to Social Security. So if you have an issue obtaining survivor benefits, that's kind of often a situation where sometimes there's bureaucratic red tape. Reach out to our office or any other issue. I know we had a issue that arose recently with the Army Corps of Engineers, with the Lake Michigan shoreline. That's an area where we can help be an intermediary to make sure that you're getting the answer you need from the federal government. So reach out to me or any of the team in the back, fill out a form. I'll be more than happy to try to assist navigating the federal government side. Contact information, that's on the sheet in the back. We're in the process, we're going to be opening an office in Racine next week. We're going to be right down in the courthouse. I have an office in Janesville, which is my hometown. And then we're looking at other opportunities where we can have a permanent location across southeast Wisconsin. But obviously, almost everybody now is transitioned where people can email and phone. Sometimes that's easier. You can do it from your house. If it's 27 below, you might not want to drive over to the office. But you're always welcome to call and email. We're always available and looking for your stuff. Before we get into the discussion, I just want to talk about one thing if I can, because I think it's important. The government shutdown and how that process played out. I'd just like to give a little bit of feedback, my perspective, kind of fresh eyes on what's going on in Washington, and to me, how frustrated and ridiculous what went on is. So I've never run for office before. I've been an elected official less than 1 month. And so this is new to me. Previously, I worked in the manufacturing sector. I worked at Regal Beloit Corporation, and I worked at Charter NEX. And in my world, if you couldn't get something done and two people couldn't agree, your manager would come in and say, you two, get in a room and figure it out and come out of the room when you have an answer. You're nodding because it probably has happened to you, Bob.
Negotiations, how we work.
And for me, more than anything, when I've seen that play out, you get stuck in a room and you tussle and you're back and forth, and you're trying to figure it out. I always think somewhere around Friday at about 5:30 p.m., cooler heads start to prevail because people want to go home and they know that they got to get a deal done before they can do it. And what was happening, in my view, in Washington is two things. One, you have people, they just want to argue their points. They're on their side. They don't want to find middle ground. They don't want to compromise. That's ridiculous and that's offensive. So that's step one. Step two that I thought was frustrating, my first speech on the floor of the House of Representatives was on this. It was, they're sending people home for the weekend. And so that's normally the case. I mean, I live in Janesville. I work and I travel back home on a traditional, when things are operating, that's the right process because everyone should go back and be able to live where they're from. But when the government's not working and not operating, you shouldn't be allowed to leave until the job is done. And so in the private sector, I'm seeing nods, so I'm guessing that's the case with you guys. It's the case at Regal Beloit or Charter NEX, where you had a problem that was so significant that it closed down the business, right? If you say the factory was closed down, nobody's leaving.
You don't go for a fish fry.
You do not leave. And so I went on the House floor and said, we should not leave until this whole doggone thing is done. I also don't think anybody should get paid until the whole doggone thing is done. That's a little different if you're working, but I think that's true. And so I said, I called the government and said, don't pay me until this thing is done. Now, we're in this gap now, so just kind of play this thing out as to how this is shaken out. So we get to last Friday, and we pass a bill that reopens the government for then 3 weeks, now 2 weeks. So now we're going to February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day. And we have another situation where the full government is only funded until that point. So at that day, if an agreement's not reached, 20% of the government goes back to where we were, which is not a situation that we should be in at all. I believe cooler heads need to prevail. We need to have a dialogue and a discussion. Starting yesterday, there's a Senate committee and a House committee that finally came together and started having this conversation. Now, out of that, both sides are a long ways apart. I'm disappointed that we didn't see in that funding for the border wall. I think the president's request is reasonable. I think there's needs to properly secure the border. But if you don't agree with that, in particular on the other side, bring something to the table and negotiate in good faith. And so what we didn't see on day one, mind you, we still have 15 days, but on day one what we didn't see was somebody coming to the middle and saying, here's an alternative proposal that's going to move the ball forward. Because what we ultimately need to do, we need to get a bill passed by the House, which is democratically controlled. We need to have it passed by the Senate, which is Republican controlled, but they need 6 Democrats to vote with the Republicans to pass it because of these crazy rules on the filibuster in the Senate. And you also have to have it signed by the President of the United States to get the bill done. And so I'm nervous about where we're going to get to on the 15th. I don't think that we should be leaving until the job is done. And I'm beyond frustrated with where we're at. And so I hope that would have been a question, but I thought before we even begin, I should just share a little bit of my experience. I'm new to Washington. Let me tell you, you'd never have a company that operates in the state of Wisconsin. And if you did, you'd all be fired for what's going on. And so we need to change that tone. I'm hoping that I can bring some of that dialogue to Washington, that we need to start working together and at our core be able to fund the federal government. And so with that, what I'd like to do with our time, hopefully I didn't burn up too much of it, but really just have a little bit of a dialogue and take questions from what's on your guys' mind and have a little bit of a back and forth. And so we can just go around, raise hands, and answer your guys' questions, if that sounds good. You want to go first, and then we'll come back to you?
You kind of mixed two subjects together, one being the shutdown, and then you brought the wall into it a little bit. Make sure it right. Okay. So I'm going to start with the shutdown. From outward appearances, it looked like we had a president who was, I think, to quote, proud of it. We have a leader in the Senate that initially wouldn't allow any discussion unless it was something that the president would sign. Do you feel that it's good to kind of hijack the legislative process? In other words, you know, the Senate is not going to move unless it's something that the president will sign. I see something fundamentally wrong with that, okay? My last point on the shutdown, I don't want to take a lot of time here. What about the movement to make shutdowns illegal? In other words, take the means away to close up shop like that. And I don't know exactly how you'd go about that. And I like to hear, I was happy to hear that you feel that if we're shutting down, then no one gets paid until we get this done. I think that's a positive step. But how about just making it so it just can't happen? So I'm going to leave it there at the shutdown, and if the discussion gets back to the wall, then I have something.
Hey, what was your name? I didn't catch your name.
I didn't say it.
Okay.
It was
No.
Joe Spitz.
Joe. So terrific question from Joe, right? So let me answer both of them because I think they're both important. So one is kind of how this played out, and then two is how do we prevent this in the future. So let's do one first, and I'll get to two because two I think is an even more critical question. So one is what happened, and I think you're in part right. Is what the Senate's doing is saying we're not going to bring a bill to the floor of the Senate until we know the president's ready to sign it. So, but also on the House side, what we were doing was we were only getting the opportunity to vote on bills that the president wasn't going to sign. So what the House, and I'm only in the House, but the House was doing, to me, was political theater. Because the House was voting on bills that knew would never become law. That's just kind of political theater. That's not accomplishing anything. And what we weren't having in the Senate side, the Senate has kind of goofy rules. And so it's separate where I live in the world, which is majority votes, right? That's kind of how we operate. The Senate has rules that to get a bill all the way through, you need 60 votes, 60 out of 100, which is their filibuster rule. So to shut the filibuster down, you need 60 votes. There's 54 Republicans, which means if it was a Republican-leaning bill, you would also need 6 Democrats to come over, right? So anything to pass the Senate requires bipartisan support. And so what we saw was we never got a situation in the Senate, and I'm not there, right? So I'm looking inside kind of like you are here, right? What was going on in the Senate was the Democrats weren't talking to the Republicans such that we could get a bill on the floor. And so as I view it, the president put forth a proposal that said we need $5.7 billion in border funding to secure the border, and that's what experts are saying at the Department of Homeland Security. I'm of the belief that that's a reasonable and appropriate amount, so I support that. Now, if you don't support that, and there's reasonable people that maybe don't, come to the table with a proposal and let's have that conversation. So what we had was people not moving off their positions. So the president came with the $5.7 billion request for the border wall, and the response was 0 and no movement. And that's how we got to the shutdown. And so I'm as frustrated as you are. I'd like to see good faith negotiations. And so where we're at now is we've come back to the table, and those negotiations are now actually occurring. And so what they call it is conference. So to get a bill that the House and the Senate can both agree to, you elect individuals that go and negotiate the final package of a bill. It's called conference. And that's what started yesterday. And so the Republicans and Democrats, Senate and the House, are finally starting to have that conversation to say, how do we get this funding in place? Now, that negotiation is going to continue, and we need to get to a spot where we get a bill that can get through the House, can get through the Senate, and get signed by the president. So I'm as frustrated as you are. It's not as easy as it should be. And then I think what you brought up, Joe, was the correct question is, okay, so this is what's going on, and kind of the the goofy situation we have today, how do we fix this going forward? And so I've sponsored a bill that puts in place what we call a continuing resolutions. That's a bunch of jargon to say you keep going until you change it. And so in the state of Wisconsin, and you'll attest to this, right? So in the state of Wisconsin, if you get to the end of a budget cycle and you don't reach an agreement, and so that's what's happened in the past, and even with all Republican control in the state of Wisconsin, sometimes the Assembly and the Senate and the governor don't reach a final agreement on the new day the new budget's needed. In Wisconsin, we do not shut down the state government. We continue to fund the government at a 0% increase from the year before until a new budget's put in place. And so you avoid the problem of even having the shutdown, and you remove it as a threat, which I believe both sides, Republicans and Democrats, historically have used it as a leveraging tactic. And so you remove that tactic by putting in place a bill that says you continue to fund the government until you have a new budget in place. The bill that I support actually takes it and provides cuts, which brings people back to the table and forces you to come to the table and reach a resolution. And to me, that's not really Democrat or Republican, liberal or conservative. That's just good governance. That prevents the shutdown from occurring in the first place. And then I'm of the view, in particular, that we need to have really thoughtful spending and to control some of that. So if you think about how this really starts to play out, the threat of a shutdown this time shut us down. The threat of a shutdown sometimes means we spend on everything. So what we've also seen in the past, not in this current situation, but also historically, is if one person wants to put additional funding into the national parks, and this person wants to put additional funding into NASA, and they both threaten each other and say, if I don't get my way, I'm going to shut the government down. The other person says, if I don't get my way, I'm going to shut the government down. And I think of it as like this game of chicken where you both start driving a car at each other and you stick your hands in the air and you say, I'm not going to stop, you better swerve your car, or we crash, which is the shutdown. And so what happens is everybody says, we don't want to crash, we don't want to crash. Not this case, but that's happened in the past. And then we fund both. And so then that's not a thoughtful spending approach. So that would kind of be like you're at home and you want to go to dinner and you want a vacation and you want a new car and you want this. Instead of prioritizing and saying, this year we're going to get a new car, or this year we're going to do this, you say, we're just going to spend it all. Well, that goes right on your credit card, and it puts you in a bad situation. I think that's often what we've done as well, is we've moved spending through that's not thoughtful. And then on the federal side, where we don't have a zero-based budget spending, is next year, if we gave both to the national parks and to NASA, you'd both come back next year and say, I want this much money plus 3%. And so not only do we get the bad idea into the budget in that year, we get the bad idea into the budget every year and growing. And so I think we need to have a much more disciplined, thoughtful approach. And the bill that I introduced, I think would directly address that. Guaranteed it would shut down any more shutdowns. It would prevent any more shutdowns. And two, I think it would force Democrats and Republicans to come together with much more thoughtful spending bills. So this is a great question. And I'll come to you. I'll come to you right after in the front.
I want to commend you on your opening remarks. You're very, very astute in what you're saying. You've been doing your homework. But the one thing I got to correct you on is you're not running anymore. You're elected congressman now. You said that. I'm running.
Oh.
You're speaking.
Well, welcome to my first listening session. Thank you for correcting. All right. Well, I got to get like a pen. I'm going to write this down. I'm going to write this down. By the sixth one, I'm going to have this flawlessly down. All right. Good you came to the first.
As far as the wall part goes, I think what's being very lost in this whole process and conversation is the laws of this land are not being enforced. Employers are allowing people to come over, hiring them for nothing, working them for terrible conditions. You should start enforcing the laws and find the employers who are hiring all these people. The jobs go away, they stop coming. The wall, in my opinion, won't work because I've been to the borders and the drugs come through the ports of entry, which are terribly understaffed. The antiquated equipment they use to detect drugs is ridiculous, and they fly in over these walls. And they're tunneling consistently. They have more people to throw at tunnels when they collapse, they don't care. And they will find a way here. I think it's a big diversion. And if you start enforcing, and I've got committees and friends in Texas and Arizona and California that tell us the same thing. Start enforcing the laws. Anybody who's been to California or Texas or Arizona, you go to any Home Depot at 6 o'clock in the morning, and there's hundreds of them sitting out in the parking lot, and you see pickup truck after pickup truck comes, I need 3 tilers, I need 3 roofers, I need this for the day. And this stuff would stop. So enforcing the laws that are existing would be a tremendous help. That's my opinion on that matter. But thank you for your.
So Bob, as your elected congressman, not running, no, I think you're right. So I think one thing that we sometimes miss is there's a lot of nuances to how we secure the border. And so I do believe the funding for the wall, whereas a physical barrier on certain sections is appropriate, but that's not to say that that's the only piece of the puzzle. I think what you bring up is some of the...
Bernie Anderson.
Morning. Bernie, you're more popular than me. This is good. But what I think you highlight is a really good point, which is there's a lot of nuance as to how we properly secure the border. So I was with the law enforcement community just the other day in Kenosha. I was with the sheriff, Dave Beth in Kenosha. We were talking in particular about how the drug trade. You got the words before I did. Right, that I-94 corridor from Chicago up to Milwaukee and then on to Madison and the Twin Cities is a major corridor, and it's drug trafficking, also human trafficking.
It's been like that for 50 years.
Right, and so parking the human trafficking and just talking about the drug trafficking for a moment, because they're both issues that beyond need to be addressed. But as we just address the drug trafficking, a lot of that is crossing over the border through legal points of entry. And there's a need to, when I view secure the border, it's a multifaceted approach. And so I do believe that we need to have a physical structure in certain locations. I think that's appropriate, but not lost on that is that we also need a manpower approach. We need a technology approach. We need to address our legal immigration structure that addresses some of the illegal supply side that you've seen. I think you also need to be proactive in addressing some of these failed states in Central America. There's a real ability to be much more proactive rather than just reactive on the illegal immigration side, where we could be proactive in Nicaragua, El Salvador, and some of the countries that are becoming failed states really close to our borders that are causing really significant humanitarian crises down there, where we could be proactive and address some of the situation on the front end. But not lost on me is the need to make sure when I say secure the border that it's a broader approach. And some of that is a real look at the drugs that are traveling through. I think they're also traveling through some non-legal ports of entry, so I think there's an appropriateness to address that. But there's also a large portion that are traveling through legal points of entry, and the scanning of vehicles that are coming through and the volume that are coming through some of our legal ports. Technology and manpower there play a big role to make sure that we can address that head on. It has a real impact. I mean, this isn't just an impact on communities that are right along the southern border. This has an impact right here in our home communities, in New Berlin and Franklin and Oak Creek and Racine and Kenosha, as those drugs are getting trafficked up I-94. And you look at the opioid epidemic, and you look at where some of this heroin and fentanyl is traveling in, and when you talk to members of the law enforcement community, they're looking front and center as to how that the supply of those drugs could be curtailed through proper enforcement of our laws at the border. So I think he's got a question that I'll come back down to you if that's all right. I'm trying to balance this back out.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay.
There was a question about Mexico paying for the wall, but when you have all these people coming up from down south there, who's paying for all these people that are moving up there? Mexico is caught in paying to feed them and whatever is take care of them. So I think they're getting caught with paying anyhow. The Democrats always bring up that Mexico's not paying for the wall, but they're kind of indirectly paying for taking care of these people that walk their way up from the south there. And it sounds like there's more of these groups coming up in the future. So Mexico is not getting off free from not getting involved in paying for some of that. But I wanted to ask too if with Mexico, the wall down there, is the president getting enough Republican backing on this? It doesn't seem like, like Pelosi gets all these other people that talk about it, these different programs, but doesn't seem like the president gets a lot of backing as far as pushing this thing through, you know, from the Republicans. It seems like it's not real strong backing to me.
So, kind of a question of where does the support lie on the president's request? And so I'm explaining. I think the funding request is appropriate and should be funded. And so I support the president's funding request. But I think what we were talking about here, right, is it's a multifaceted approach. So the physical structure on the border is one piece of a broader puzzle of how we address our illegal immigration challenge. Right, and so what we need to have is a thoughtful approach that's guided by people that are on the front of this issue. And so when I look at the Department of Homeland Security providing guidance as to what they need, that's often where I'm looking for that guidance. And so the $5.7 billion is requested by the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. And so I think that when you're talking to people that are right on the front lines, that's a great resource. But it's a multifaceted approach. And also we're talking some of these quasi-failed states that we're seeing in Central America, it has a major impact. And we have an ability to be proactive into some of those regions to address this issue head on rather than just being reactive as individuals come.
Venezuela, with the problems they're having down there, the president's speaking up about that anyhow. You don't hear much from the Democratic side about that situation there.
Thanks. Do you have a question?
Yeah,
and then I'll go behind you and get back to you
I
again.
certainly want, express the reason why half of us are here is because of the multi-employer pension system in the country that started in the 1940s and 50s with our parents and grandparents. And within 5 years, it's going to collapse. And I have some information we'd certainly like to get to you with a meeting with all of us here, maybe in Janesville or something
Love it.
like that.
Would love it.
Because this is such a big issue. We've been working on this 4 years. That's why there's such a demand and responsible stuff being done in Congress. We've had a joint select committee that Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell appointed with 16 different senators and congressmen. But of course, they were that far away and they couldn't get it done. So we're going to probably need another year to fix it. Yeah, so the Joint Select Committee got so close, but they couldn't come up with a 5-5 vote. They got 4-4, and they couldn't get it done.
And as you're learning, and Lonnie will test to this, she's the senior government employee here. We've been
Lonnie's here?
Lonnie's here. We're kidding. Government.
I love New Berlin. You guys all know each other. This is like how it
She
should be.
told us
Great.
4 years ago that government moves slow, and we just kind of didn't have
Didn't
any
believe it.
clue it moves at this rate. 5 years we're into this, and we can't get nothing done. And we've had, like Bernie said, we've met with the Secretary of Treasury, we've had a route in the west lawn of the Capitol, we've gone almost coast to coast. And
July 17th of 2017. 30 of us met with the Treasury Secretary, and he knows that he called it a zombie because there's 10 million participants involved, and 200,000 companies could be forced into bankruptcy if the multi-employer pension system collapses, which it could do with the failure of central states.
If you think
Okay.
35 days put a hurt on this country.
Yeah, that's correct.
10 million pensioners and take their pensions away.
Yeah, so that's what we're looking at with the multi-employer
Okay.
pension system.
You have information for me?
Oh, I got all kinds of it, but
Okay, I didn't know if you brought that specifically for me. But would be
we'll-
happy to set up
Yeah,
a specific
we'll go over it,
meeting. And anybody, Rich in the back, we'll lock it up and find a
Susie's
time.
our main
Oh,
girl.
yeah.
You're already like a step ahead
All
here.
right.
You know the whole team. This is good. So you've been working on but in a true sense, let's get a time to sit down and have that conversation. I'd be happy to sit down and dive in and do a whole
Yeah, 'cause
sit down just on this one issue.
To do it in a few minutes to try and get 4 years worth of work, and we can't do it.
I must say,
Yeah.
it's gonna
Thank
be
you.
a lot easier to get a meeting with you than it was for us to get a meeting with Paul Ryan.
Well, it's understandable.
Paul Ryan didn't do meetings. He didn't do these.
All right, guys. Yes, he did.
Okay.
Yes, he
No,
did.
we started out, we had met with Paul.
I'll tell you the good news is my name's Brian.
Yeah.
So I won't speak on behalf of
history.
anybody else or anybody's
history.
review, but I can offer you that I'm more than happy to have the conversation. My goal when I ran is to be as accessible as I can possibly be, and so that's why I started off right out of the gates. I'm not even a month in, and I'm going to get to all 6 counties by Monday to have this conversation, and then on top of that, happy to sit down and listen.
It's a great start.
And so I can't offer everything, but I can offer you that I'm going to work my tail off. I'm gonna be a good listener. So
We thank you for that.
that would be
We appreciate that.
that was trained by my mother. In case we got my grandma got an applauser, so my mom,
I want your
Trisha, you can
grandmother-
like her for those 2
I want your
things.
grandmother's phone number.
Nice, yeah.
Maybe your mother's
Yeah.
number too.
Ryan, one thing I would like to point out is that, you know, I have heard that this isn't the federal government's responsibility. Well, I think considering the dramatic impact it would have on the economy, I think it is. But more important than that, in 1982, there was a consent decree where the federal government took oversight of the Central States Pension Fund. This, we as a union did not ask for the federal government to take oversight of our pension fund. This was what the consent decree dictated. And now, all these years later, as the situation has become worse and worse, the federal government has done nothing to avert this predictable disaster, because it just didn't happen overnight. It happened over a series of years. And I think that sometimes that doesn't get mentioned. And as a new congressman, I would like to point that out, because you're going to hear undoubtedly, well, that's not our responsibility. I would submit that it is, because the federal government took oversight of the fund. And their oversight, I think, on a common sense definition would mean guidance and responsibility, and they did not do that. It's like they took oversight, but now that things are bad, oh, we have nothing to do with that. Oh, yes, you do, federal government.
They're still in control of this.
Yeah, and still are.
Yep.
And still are. So I think that there's a connection there that should not be overlooked. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks
And
for
thanks
sharing.
for being
I
here.
think there's an opportunity for me to take some of the and then to digest it.
No more
and then
pension questions, guys. We'll handle that at a private.
Go here and then come back. I want to get everybody to get a first question in. So let's
Okay,
go
thank
here.
you, Brian. Back in 2010, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law both passed away from pancreatic cancer. And my wife is in a program at Freighter in the medical college where she's tracked every year, and she has a cyst on the pancreas, but right now, thank God, it's benign. I've been here to talk about funding for the NIH, which trickles down to the American Cancer Society, which then would trickle down to pancreatic cancer funding. I'm going to be with a group from Wisconsin and around the nation of probably 500 or more people in June 25th, to talk about funding in the next budget for cancer research. And I think cancer is something that has touched absolutely everybody in this country, if not directly, indirectly through a relative or a friend of theirs. I'm very concerned about the exploding deficit. The deficit has been bad up to this point, but this year it took a huge step, and it's set, from what I've read, to even go higher and higher. And I won't give my opinion and bring politics into it and why the deficit has exploded, but I'm also against removing money from other budgets, existing money from budgets, to finance other things where it could go to cancer session. So I in the past, I met with Congressman Ryan twice on this issue, once in his office. Usually it's with health aides. We go down there. This will be my 4th trip to Washington.
When
My
you,
wife-
oh, you're coming out. We talked about this earlier. You're coming out shortly.
Yes, my
Okay.
wife will be there, and other people from Wisconsin.
Okay.
Little known fact, over 3 point something people are diagnosed with pancreatic cancer every day in Wisconsin. 2+ people die from the disease. We're very fortunate to have Freighter, but we've got to do something to increase cancer funding. So be on the lookout for people wearing purple shirts on June 25th.
So thanks for coming, and thanks for sharing your story. I lost my grandfather to prostate cancer, and so front of mind on the impact that cancer can have in our personal lives. I mentioned earlier, I served on the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents, which oversees partially some of the research arm of the UW Hospital, and some of the federal funds that come in to really sophisticated cancer research right here in the state of Wisconsin. And so as a conservative, I often think that federal funding should be curtailed unless it's absolutely necessary. But where I look into some of the NIH funding, there's areas where you can have a great, significant benefit where there wouldn't be a place for private investment for that payoff. But ultimately, we would win as a society. And so I look favorably upon a lot of the specific NIH funding and look forward to your visit to Washington to talk about that big picture, but also on the pancreatic side in particular.
Great, and one other quick thing I'd like to mention is the Department of Defense actually funds some funding for pancreatic cancer research because with the logic that it could impact any of our military, that it could be a severe problem, so we've gotten some funding from them.
Interesting. I did not know that piece came through.
Okay, something else to look into then.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that.
Hi, I'm Cara Spoilon with Waukesha Freeman. So
Welcome.
enjoying listening to all you guys here today. I just wanted to go back to what you said about the president's funding request, and you've talked about this publicly to other newspapers. And,
Yeah.
so you said you support the funding request, so the $5.7 billion, but it sounds like what you're saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. So you're saying not all for the wall, but the $5.7 million to be spread out across other approaches, or
So let me be maybe a little more specific.
sure.
So I might not have been as clear as I could be. So the $5.7 billion is for a physical structure on the border. I support the president's request with $5.7 billion for a physical structure on the border. In addition, I think that broader security, big picture, has other aspects, not just the border wall is a piece of a puzzle of how we address border security.
So you would see the
And so-
$5.7 million for the wall and then additional funding for other
Right,
efforts like we've discussed here.
Correct, right. So the $5.7 billion is for a physical structure, and I think the president's used terms of call it what you want. I think he made it all the way to the word peaches, if I recall his speech correctly. And so, concrete barrier, steel slat. Let the experts walk through what the barrier physically looks like and what is most effective, right? So they talk, concrete, you can't see the other side. Steel slats, you can see through. I mean, have that discussion at the appropriate level where there's experts who understand how it's put in place and where it's needed. And what the Department of Homeland Security is requesting is $5.7 billion, which would generate, rough math, 280 miles of wall. Rough math, and I can get you the exact number so I don't get PolitiFact. I say that jokingly, but there's the piece that should go to a physical structure, and that's what's being requested by experts. But then, in addition to that, I support funding that has a broad-based approach which addresses other things like drugs that are going through legal points of entry, where we can enhance our ability to detect those drugs through manpower and through technology. And some of that funding is in place and not being debated currently, because both sides, Democrats, Republicans, overall agree to some of those other areas of importance. I think the sticking point is on this very specific $5.7 billion, which would go to a physical structure, a permanent physical structure on the southern border.
Brian, I'm sorry to interrupt, a 2-minute warning here, and keep us on
They-
time.
Okay, just a real quick follow-up, because you did
Sure.
this, I don't think you really finished the thought. You were talking about the ability to be proactive instead of reactive to the migrant crisis, because we have
Sure.
this other thing where
Yep.
these people are coming to a legal point of entry saying, with refugee status, we have these things going on, and there's a big swell of people from southern states
Yep.
below Mexico. So, what do you mean by being proactive? What would you like to see the government do there?
So great question. So I always look, so my business background always says, get ahead of the problem, be proactive, and prevent the problem from occurring. I think our federal government is always far too often reactive. It waits for a problem to occur and then reacts. And so as I look at a lot of the illegal immigration crisis, we're seeing a large number of individuals coming from a small number of countries in Central America. And so a lot of those countries have very significant problems, whether or not that, in particular, security issues inside their home country. And what we have the opportunity to do as a nation is to be proactive and to help allow those countries to find ways to make their countries safer and more secure. And if we are effective at that, we would, what I call is a pull and a push. And we talked a little bit earlier about some of the pull. Bob brought up some points as to what might be pulling people, but there's also an aspect of a push. And so some of these people are departing their home countries because they feel that they're being pushed for security purposes. In particular, is often the stories that I'm told from individuals from those regions. And so I think there's an opportunity to be proactive, address some of the security crises that are occurring in Central American countries, and address the push side of this problem, and to try to be proactive and to be a step ahead.
Is that like funding or?
Yeah, so funding would be a piece of a piece of that puzzle, yeah. And we've seen that play out. I mean, an analogy that plays out is if you look at what occurred in Colombia, where the United States got involved in what was a very significant civil war that involved drug cartels in Colombia. The United States got involved in a multifaceted approach, and now Colombia is a pretty secured and safe country relative to where it was not that long ago, where it was in the midst of a pretty significant civil war. And so if you address the security crisis that's occurring in some of these countries, you address some of the push, which to me is a proactive approach at addressing the illegal immigration crisis, rather than just focusing on the reactive side. And so that's kind of where I like to think that I bring my business background. On the business side, if you're the firefighter, the best firefighter prevents the fire, right? I mean, you want your fire marshal to come in and inspect and to look at the room and to say, okay, how am I going to prevent a fire from ever occurring in this building in the first place? That's your best guy on the team. Then you also want to have a team in place that, if one still occurs, now we got to react. And you still want spectacular, you still have to have a reaction. But how do we go that one step in front and prevent it in the first place?
30 seconds.
Yeah, no, these guys are going to whip me, but go ahead.
Along the lines of being proactive?
Yeah.
Okay, please look at the U.S.'s history and what we've supported and done in the past in Central America, because that, in large part, what happened decades ago can be traced to some of the problems that are there today. So when you start talking about going in and meddling, okay, think it through, okay, is the one thing. Back to the wall for a second. So if I'm understanding, 5.7 billion gets us a start of a wall, okay, and there's numbers out there that say, yeah, a real wall would be 25, 35, 40 billion. There's numbers all over the place. I would encourage you to talk to one of your colleagues, one of your peers, Will Hurd. He's the Republican.
I know Will. Will's a great guy. Will's a great guy.
23rd district in Texas.
Yeah,
He's got
just outside El Paso.
820 miles.
Largest amount of border wall.
Okay.
Yep.
And he has no use for the wall. He has use for increased security.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But to just come along and say, let's start building this wall, at 5.7 billion, and then that's essentially a down payment on a couple hundred miles of it. I mean, it makes great optics. I can picture people standing in front of it and pointing and looking and saying, see what we did. I don't see much more coming out of it, to be honest with you, other than debt.
Got an infinite domain takeover too, that people in Texas will not be looking at.
So I appreciate the thoughts. Where I often look at it is what is the expert saying. So where they're at is saying we could get significant enhancement off of this 5.7 billion and the 287 miles, I believe.
Expert now.
Right, but it's sitting there. And so I had the opportunity to have a conversation with the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, and that's my view, and I think it's an appropriate
It's refreshing
request.
to hear that you listen to experts. I don't see that universally in politics these days.
As I said earlier to another comment, my name's Brian, so I won't comment on everyone. I'll only give you what I can do for myself. Can we do one more? Yeah, we're gonna do one more. Yeah.
What that gentleman was just talking about, and what Bob talked about, why do we need a wall to patrol these areas when we could get Homeland Security helicopters or the Border Patrol helicopters to patrol these areas with radios and communicate with Border Patrol officers on the ground? This wall is a ludicrous idea. They're either gonna go over the top or they're gonna go under. If you remember, El Chapo was in prison. They dug a mile tunnel, put a motorcycle in it, came out right underneath his cell, and he drove right out. They got more time. They got more time to dig these tunnels than you guys got money to build walls.
So we're starting to cover this point pretty clearly, but I appreciate the thought, and I do think that it's and what I want to go back to is it's a piece of the puzzle, and so I agree it's not.
Very small piece.
I mean, we can have that debate. But I mean, I think I view that it's an important piece of the puzzle, but it's a piece, and there's other areas, and so the technology of securing our southern border is a piece. Manpower, that's kind of the helicopter example, manpower technology combined. And again, I think it's a lot of listening to the experts of the Department of Homeland Security and having those conversations.
Why don't we work on the easy pieces first, and if those don't work, then
Oh, yeah.
on the wall.
I would be of the view that that's this first, which is not to, it's not going to be side to side.
How much is
We're going to do one more.
manpower and helicopter costs for each one? That's not expensive.
And a lot of that's listening to the experts in the Border Patrol, along with, which is under the Department of Homeland Security, to say, how do we do this most thoughtfully, most effectively? And that's where I'm in the process of listening to those individuals. Well, you guys, yeah. Thank you guys for coming out. This is my first one, so thanks for sharing it with me.
Good job.
Have a great day, guys.
Thanks a lot.